for the California Dried Plum Board. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to today's webinar on bone health and other scientific research related to prunes. Before I introduce the presenters, I have some housekeeping items that I'd like to review. I would like to mention that as you think of questions during the presentation, please type it in at the window in the sidebar, and we will address it at the end of the webinar. The webinar slides will be available in both English and French later in the week. Also, the audio version of this webinar will be available for download later this week. Communications will be sent to you with links to these items. And following the webinar, a short survey will be sent to you, and we would really appreciate it if you would take the time to complete it. I would like to introduce our presenters, Mary Jo Feeney and Cara Rosenbloom. Mary Jo Feeney is recognized as a leading consultant to the food, agriculture, and healthcare industries. Currently, she serves as a nutrition advisor for the California Dried Plum Board, the Mushroom Council, and the American Pistachio Growers. She's a charter fellow of the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and served on the Academy and its foundation's board of directors, and is a past recipient of the Academy's Medallion Award. Cara Rosenbloom is the president of Words to Eat By, a nutrition communications company in Toronto. Cara is a nutrition writer, culinary instructor, and professional speaker, and is a wellness columnist for the Washington Post, and has written for many magazines, including Chatelaine, Canadian Living, and Today's Parent. She is co-author of the cookbook Nourish, Whole Food Recipes featuring seeds, nuts, and beans, and is currently working on her second book. Welcome to both of our speakers. Before I pass the presentation to our speakers, however, I'd like to review the webinar objectives. These are the three primary objectives. First, to obtain greater insight into the nutrient composition of prunes and how they contribute to a healthy diet. Second, to gain a better understanding of the scope of the nutrition research on prunes. And third, to learn more about the scientific research showing that prunes help support healthy bones. Let me give you a little background about the California Dried Plum Board, or Prune Board as it is known in most parts of the world. The California Dried Plum Board represents growers and prune packers who have been producing premium quality prunes for more than 150 years. California has a perfect growing condition for producing prunes with fertile soil and long, warm growing seasons. We produce 40% of the world's supply of prunes, and Canada, as the third largest export market, is a very important market for us. We have the highest food safety standards in the prune industry, and California Dried Plum Board is leading the way in supporting world-class research on the nutritional benefits of incorporating prunes into our diet. And now I would like to ask Cara to share some insights on Canadian perceptions of prunes. Cara?
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm happy to talk about the Canadian side of things. And interestingly, we see different perspectives in English Canada and in French Canada. So in English Canada, there is some perception among older adults that prunes help with digestive issues. Not really a surprise. We know they've been used for years for constipation, so that is true. But interestingly, what we find is that millennials, though the younger generation, don't share this same perception. They just eat prunes as a snack like they would eat any other dried fruit, and some millennials have never even tasted a prune. So the overall perception we're finding in English Canada is quite neutral. In French Canada, there is a very positive attitude towards prunes, and that's probably because the French word for plum is prune. So when French-speaking Canadians hear the word prunes, they think of what we consider fresh plums, so fresh, colorful, nutritious fruits. And they do use prunes extensively in both cooking and baking, in sweet and savory dishes. So for example, French cooks may use prunes to enrich a pork or a chicken dish in a savory application, but they also use them in baking for things like loaves and cakes. So prunes are very popular in Quebec. We've also looked at the most recent Mintel study in 2017 on Canadians' attitudes towards healthy eating, and we wanted to see what we could infer about prunes and functional foods based on this data. What we found was that majority of Canadians, so 84%, believe that what they eat positively affects their health. So, proving the old adage true that you are what you eat. We found that 45% of Canadians are interested in trying a food that offers health benefits, and 35% look for recipes that include those types of healthy ingredients. And we also found that 40% of Canadians are going online to find foods that may work to address a specific health condition that they have. So what does that mean for prunes? Where do prunes come into all this? I think it's safe to say they fit in a niche of a nutritious food with health benefits that could be used as a functional food for bone health, for digestive issues, etc. Moving on, more information on the Canadian perception of prunes. We have data here that is a snapshot of the conversations that Canadians have been having about prunes over the past 6 months on Twitter, on Facebook, on blogs, and through different news sources. And we've grouped that information into the sentiments being positive, neutral, or negative around how people view prunes. And you'll see from the green bar that the overall perception is quite positive. 63% of the mentions of prunes in the social media and blog contexts are actually positive. So that's good news. And moving on to the word cloud at the bottom, the word cloud it's great to see that there's no negative comments about prunes. The largest words, which are representative of what the majority of the conversation is focused on, are very positive words or simply factual words. So the words that are mentioned most often are the largest in this word cloud. So we're seeing things like healthy, food, good, naturally occurring sugar, and dried fruit. And then there's some smaller words that pop out that show that some Canadians are beginning to associate prunes with positive health messages. So the words that we're seeing here are things like gut health, bone health, digestive health, and trusted foundational food. So those are all good things. And just as a snapshot of where this information is coming from, you will see a majority comes from Ontario. And that's not really surprising since the population here is larger and there's more media and influencer outlets in Ontario than in the other provinces across Canada. So when you are talking to your clients or your patients about prunes, there's some very typical questions that are going to come up. So first of all, how many prunes is a serving? And according to Health Canada, 40 grams is considered a serving, and that works out to about 5 prunes, and that'll deliver 100 calories. It's got 3 grams of fiber, and interestingly, it's a source of potassium, of magnesium, of vitamin B2, and is an excellent source of vitamin K, which plays into their role in bone health, which Mary Jo is going to talk about in a second. And they also are known to not raise blood glucose levels, and that may be due to their low GI and low glycemic load, which Mary Jo will also touch on. And now I'm happy to introduce Mary Jo, first to give you the American perception of prunes and then do a deeper dive into the science.
Thank you, Cara. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Americans, rather than joking or thinking about prunes in unflattering terms, simply do not think about them at all. Prunes are not top of mind. So this webinar will help consumers keep prunes top of mind. The research information can prepare you to recognize and remove perceived barriers, then reinforce your advice with tips customized for your consumer's lifestyle and life stage, and then, of course, repeat the process as their personal priorities change. Now, the California Prune Board has conducted nutrition research for the past 2 decades, beginning in 1997. And these form the basis of our scientific communications, both to you as health professionals and also to consumers. Our efforts are guided by a scientific nutrition advisory panel, and over the 2 decades, we have investigated prune's role in a variety of these particular areas of interest. Today, however, we're going to focus on the research on prunes help support healthy bones. This may seem an unusual connection. However, the preclinical and clinical evidence reviewed by those with expertise in food law enables us to make this structure-function language. Note, however, that the prune industry is not making an osteoporosis claim. Scientists directly involved in their research may use terms in their publications such as confirm, prevent, or unique, but this represents their assessment of the state of the research. When you consider that the postmenopausal period between ages 50 and 80 plus can occupy about 1/3 of women's lives, during which they can lose 1 to 1.5% of their bone yearly, the role of lifestyle, activity, and a nutritious diet, including prunes, becomes important. Now, first, some definitions. The prunes used in the clinical trials are of the prune-making variety. While all prunes start out as fresh plums, not all plum varieties become prunes. Commercial prunes are the dehydrated version of the improved French variety. This variety has a naturally occurring sugar content that enables them to be dried while still containing the pit and without fermenting. Thus, our research finding on prunes and bone may not be applicable to any or all fresh plums. Dried plum powder is made from ground from whole prune solids. This powder is used in our animal studies because the powder has to be incorporated into the animal's diet. Powder is used in the ingredient market as a fat replacement in bakery and other products to extend shelf life and enhance moisture, but it is not generally available to consumers. Now, because our time is short, I'm going to refer you to this very excellent review on dietary bioactives and bone health that appeared in a special issue of the journal Nutrients in April. These articles are open access, and you can download them at no charge. Here you can read in detail about the different experimental models, the doses, outcome measures, and some thoughts about the mechanism of prunes at the cellular level and the nutrients involved, along with suggestions for future research. To date, there are 2 published clinical trials with prunes in postmenopausal women. A 3-month trial just to see if prunes had any effect on markers of bone turnover, not on bone mineral density because this was only a short 3-month trial. But these same researchers followed up in a larger trial with more women for 1 year using the same dried fruits that they used in their 3-month study. This would be prunes, 100 grams, or between 10 and 12 prunes at one time, or if you did it as 2 servings, it could be 5 to 6 prunes, compared to the dried apple. These dried fruits were matched for calories, carbohydrate, and fiber. All participants received supplements of calcium and vitamin D because they are of known benefit to postmenopausal women, and they could not ethically be withheld from the participants. The research measured whole body bone mineral density along with biomarkers of bone turnover. Bone is living and undergoes continual formation and breakdown known as remodeling, which occurs lifelong. In childhood and adolescence, the linear growth or modeling predominates, but once growth is completed, remodeling is the dominant way in which bone is either added or removed from the skeleton. Each remodeling event begins with the initial phase of bone resorption or breakdown, coupled to a longer phase of bone formation. This process is not 100% efficient in that the amount of new bone formed does not completely make up for the older bone that has been removed, so a small bone deficit remains. Remodeling goes on constantly. It can't be totally stopped, but anything that slows remodeling would be considered beneficial. Whoops, I need to go back and review the results for that study. So the results show that both dried fruits, both the dried apple and the prunes, had bone protective effects. That is, the women did not lose bone, but only prunes had a significant effect on bone mineral density in the spine and the ulna, which is the forearm. C-reactive protein was significantly lower in the prune group at 3 months, although both groups had about the same value at the end of the study. Now, the reason I bring CRP up at this time is that this particular study, although published in 2011, began in 2007. And even at that early time, there was some interest in whether or not prunes worked at the cellular level as an anti-inflammatory, perhaps lowering the pro-inflammatory effects on bone. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this study is that even though these women ate 100 grams of prunes a day for a year, providing 240 calories or more, they did not gain weight. And although the study was not designed to investigate that, the authors wondered whether or not it was the fiber contributing to satiety or whether or not the participants just adjusted their intake. Attrition and compliance were about the same for the groups, which meant that it was feasible for women to eat this quantity of prunes for a whole year. Now, there have been some additional analysis on the postmenopausal women who were involved in this particular study. The researchers used samples from blood samples from the women in the one-year trial to investigate the effect of prunes on bone metabolism as a potential mechanism for protective effects. And although they found some effect on biomarkers regulating the different signaling pathways, these changes did not reach a significant level. So that means that there's just going to have to be more research along the mechanistic line. The researchers also wondered whether or not the bone protective benefits of prunes remained if prunes were no longer eaten on a regular basis. So the researchers called back women from the initial one-year trial for another bone mineral density scan. The prune group retained bone mineral density to a greater degree than the women in the apple group, although the numbers were small. There were only 8 women from the prune group or 12 women from the apple group. This particular study investigated whether or not a lower dose of prunes might also have similar effects, because the original trial used 100 grams, and this might seem a little bit challenging for women to do on an ongoing basis. And so the 50-gram dose, or about 5 or 6 prunes, would be a more reasonable amount as a lifestyle food-based strategy to improve bone health. So according to the results, both the 50 and the 100 grams of prunes per day had bone protective effects. There was no net change from baseline in the women who ate prunes in their bone mineral density, whereas the control group continued to lose bone. Both doses resulted in a reduction of the of a bone resorption marker, but there was no change in the control group. There were other non-significant changes in the various blood biomarkers, prompting the investigators to interpret this with caution because bone mineral densities are more clinically relevant. Now we'll look at some preclinical evidence. These are studies in cell cultures or in animal studies because these are useful to suggest possible mechanisms. These also are reviewed in the articles in Nutrients. The clinical trials that I just reviewed for you on postmenopausal women used a hormone deficiency model. These animal studies looked at a different model, the loss of bone due to aging, as well as the ability of prunes to increase peak bone mass in growing animals. Aging model does differ from the hormone deficiency model. And this is interesting because when we talk about bone loss in postmenopausal women, often we hear, well, you know, not everybody's postmenopausal. So what is a more general condition that we all experience? It's called aging, and we all begin to lose bone around age 30. So it's important to alert younger women also about the bone protective effects of prunes. Now, this was an animal study, and the animals received different doses of dried plum powder for 6 months. The animals were in animal age, considered either equivalent to human adults or age, and both of these ages of animals, whether or not an adult or age, gained bone on the 25% diet. Now, this was a high-dose diet that would translate to about 20 to 25 prunes a day for the equivalent in human consumption. But the adult mice were able to gain bone on a lower dose diet, but the response was blunted in older mice, meaning that the older mice did not gain bone on a lower dose diet. So this particular study does show that in animals, prunes increased bone volume and restored bone loss due to aging. Now the question often is, are prunes unique in their ability to support healthy bones? Reports in the literature, as well as epidemiology, identify the beneficial effects of fruits and vegetables on bones, perhaps through contributing minerals such as potassium or magnesium, bioactive compounds such as polyphenols, or maybe those who eat fruits and vegetables just have a higher quality diet in general. This study compared the effect of selected dried fruits on bone in a hormone-deficient model in mice fed the high 25% dried plum diet. The selection of these dried fruits was based on the fruit undergoing similar processing that prunes undergo, as well as being rich sources of antioxidants or having other bone protective properties that have been identified through research. Whole body and spine bone mineral density improved in the mice that consumed the prune, apricot, and grape diets compared to the control. But prunes were the only fruit to have an anabolic or positive bone-building effect in the sites mentioned. Now, I want to just call your attention briefly to some of those bioactive polyphenols that have been identified in prunes as perhaps being responsible for some of these bone protective effects. These are polyphenols in the hydroxycinnamon family, and they include neochlorogenic, cryptochlorogenic, and chlorogenic acid. I realize that these terms don't exactly flow easily off the tongue, but when we talk about prunes polyphenols, these are the ones that we have in mind. The author of this particular study was also careful to note that in addition to the polyphenols, prunes also provide nutrients that are known to have positive effects on bone, including magnesium, vitamin K, boron, and potassium. So in summary, prunes are the whole package. Most research suggests that prunes slow bone breakdown, but more research is needed. Do prunes help absorb calcium? Do they act as an antioxidant at the cellular level? What are the roles of the minerals and the vitamins and the polyphenols in dried plums? What's the role of sorbitol or fiber that can change the gut microbiota? We know that undigestible carbohydrates that reach the large intestine can provide food for the good bacteria. Short-chain fatty acids, which are derived from dietary fiber, often can lower the pH of the GI tract. A lower pH in the GI tract favors the absorption of nutrients. So, as I said, we just don't know what exactly the mechanism is or exactly what the minerals or vitamins or bioactives are, but they all work together in the whole package. Now, I briefly went over all the research that we have to date, but I wanted to bring you more current with what we're doing now, because we realize there are only 2 clinical trials in postmenopausal women, and they were done by the same researchers. So we need to go and expand our investigation, and we are doing a large randomized controlled trial with postmenopausal women at Penn State University, and there will be 3 groups One group will receive a low dose or 50 grams of prunes, the other 100, and there will be a control group. This is a one-year study. The primary outcomes you can see listed there, but the thing that is important to look at is that this particular study will estimate bone strength, because although osteoporosis is a serious condition, the final outcome is whether or not you break a bone. So it's important to have data on bone strength. We are also taking a look at the secondary outcomes like inflammatory markers, as I mentioned before, that there's some thinking that prunes work at the cellular level, and they're also looking at the microbiota changes to see if there's any relationship between the polyphenols that are in the prunes that are eaten with the polyphenols that are then analyzed in the participant's serum or urine. Now, we're not forgetting about men. Men do have a risk for osteoporosis or low bone mass, but it usually occurs later in life, and because they generally have a larger body frame to begin with, their bone loss is delayed somewhat. But it is an understudied population, and we don't want to ignore the role of prunes in men. So we have undertaken a shorter trial at San Diego State University with this age group of men, and there's not much data on what the bone mineral density score is for most men, so they're not being screened for their low bone mineral density. We're just looking for men to complete this particular trial. It will be a 6-month intervention, the same as the other ones. The primary outcome are the measurements of bone turnover at 3 months. They will also measure bone mineral density at 6 months, but it might be too short of a trial to see any effects in that, and we hope to have some information on that later in next year. So I began the webinar by saying one way that you can help consumers keep prunes top of mind is to know the research, because that forms the basis of your good advice. However, we also have to recognize and remove barriers that consumers may have about prunes, one of which might be carbohydrate. Consumers might consider prunes just a concentrated source of calories or carbohydrate. But we do have research showing that in the short term, women who consume prunes report a greater satiety. In the longer term, after eating prunes for 2 weeks, the triglyceride levels in women did not increase. Where they did increase when they ate a carbohydrate snack that provided the same amount of carbohydrate but didn't have the vitamin, mineral, and fiber composition that the prune snack did. So we have found that prunes do help and suppress appetite more than a similar sweet, low-fat, refined snack, perhaps by lowering glucose or the appetite-regulating hormones. Another barrier might be the perception on digestive health, but our research has shown that prunes really do help normalize the digestive system. For those who may need to have some relief from constipation, we do know that dried plums are safe and palatable when they're compared to psyllium, matched for fiber, for moderate constipation, and should be considered a first line of therapy. Now, I wanted to mention that in the clinical trial that used the 2-dose 50 grams or a 100-gram dose of prunes, the women kept a digestive health or a stool diary list. And as a result, we have found out that these women did not report any adverse effects in their GI system. Also, it was interesting because these women were older and postmenopausal. They often report constipation. In addition, they were also taking calcium and vitamin D supplements, and sometimes these supplements are known to cause constipation. So these women did report less pain and less problems than the women who did not have who were on the controlled diet. We also want to point out that prunes are the only fresh or dried fruit that can have a generic health claim, normal bowel function. And this health claim in the European Union is based on 100 grams or about 2 40-gram nutrition facts servings each day. So now that you know the research behind prunes, helping to support healthy bones, and perhaps ways to address some of the reservations or the questions that people have about the carbohydrate or the digestive health benefits, we now have to take a look at how you can reinforce your information with what we call tips and triggers. You know your clients, you know their lifestyle. Are they on the go? Do they need a portable snack? Do active athletes need the quick energy from carbohydrate? Are you dealing with just a health-conscious population that is looking for more fiber or nutrient-dense food? And so then you can team them with eating occasions. Here are just some visual examples of tips and triggers. Not everybody is a foodie. Maybe, you just have to say you can just put some prunes in your cereal in the morning. For those who like to cook, there are many recipes on the California Dried Plum Board website that will enable you to give tips to your clients on how they can incorporate them into salads, into main dishes, or even into smoothies. So, to help consumers keep prunes top of mind, review the research. Because you are a trustworthy nutrition professional, be on top of these research findings so that you can communicate better to your clients, recognize and remove their perceived barriers, reinforce their food decisions with tips and triggers, and repeat and realign with lifestyle priorities because people do change as they go through life stage. So now I believe I will turn it back over to Cara, who will describe our next steps.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Wonderful overview of the science. And to all of you listening, we'd love to be able to give you more tools to help inform your clients. So there is a Prune toolkit available. If you want to request one, you can send an email to the address on your screen. And they are also offering samples of prunes, which are amazingly delicious, so you definitely want to get your hands on those. For more information, and including the recipes that Mary Jo mentioned, you can visit the CaliforniaDriedPlums.org website, or you can join the conversation on social media on Twitter at CADriedPlums or on Instagram at California Dried Plums. And we hope to hear from you. I will now turn it back over to questions to Debbie for questions.
Debbie Mitchell, great. So we already have a few questions that came in during the presentations, but if you have more, please go ahead and type them in. I am going to address this question to Mary Jo, and the question is, the biggest question I have is putting this into context for a client. How much of a change will we see in a bone scan if a postmenopausal woman eats 5 prunes per day over time? Also wondering if prunes may be a useful strategy for adolescent growing bones also, and if research is happening on that.
Okay, thank you. Well, each woman is going to be individual, as you all know as health professionals. A lot of it really depends on whether or not the woman, the individual, has reached peak bone mass before she starts to lose bone, either through aging or being postmenopausal. So I think the best way to take a look at this is we know that women lose about 1 to 1.5% of bone per year. So when a woman has a bone mineral density scan, generally it's done every 2 years. It takes that long to see, whether or not there's going to be any improvement. The report out on a bone mineral density scan is usually in a T-score, and so I'm not sure how to equate the 1 to 1.5% loss of bone a year to an individual's T-score. So I would think a way to look at it is whether or not women's T-score at least remains the same. I have asked this question of some of the researchers, and I don't know, just because everybody is individual and so much depends on the quality of the diet from early on, whether or not the woman is physically active, whether or not she's a smoker. All these things affect where someone starts out if they reach peak bone mass. And if that hasn't happened, then they're at greater risk to lose more bone, whereas someone who has reached peak bone mass may lose it at a slower rate. But the important thing is to be able to slow the loss of bone, which our research, at least to date, has been able to support. Yes, it would be good to communicate the bone protective benefits of prunes to younger populations. We do not have clinical trials in premenopausal women or teens. The only thing that we have is the animal study that does show that, at least in growing animals, prunes do enable the animal to reach peak bone mass.
Great. Thanks, Mary Jo. Another question is, can elder adults who are on blood thinners have prunes with no adverse effects?
Well, again, we haven't tested that. When we say that prunes are an excellent source of vitamin K, and you look at the amount of vitamin K that's in prunes versus the amount of vitamin K that are in the really, really high levels of vitamin K, the green leafy vegetables that are generally on a list for people who are taking blood thinners to avoid. So prunes are not at that level. So I think the thing, as I understand it, about blood thinners is that you don't want to have huge swings in your food choices. So if someone is eating prunes and there's no adverse effect on the blood measurements, then I would think that would still be suitable for that particular person. But again, it just depends. If somebody is a high consumer of these leafy greens that are very high in vitamin K, that's where the advice generally comes in.
Okay, another question. For bone health, the study suggests to eat about 5 prunes per day. If the client asks us if they should eat them all at the same time or in different time in the day, what should we suggest and why?
I think we suggest they can that it's up to them to eat them however they choose. In our clinical trial, for the women who are eating either the 50 or the 100-gram portions a day, we're giving them ideas on how to use them at breakfast or a snack, or or incorporate them in a casserole or eat them at dinner. So our clinical trials are probably based on distributing those portion sizes throughout the day.
Okay. Another question, are benefits seen with prune juice as well?
We haven't investigated prune juice, no.
Okay. Here's another question. It appears from these studies that prunes may help slow bone loss, but has there been any research that shows prunes actually prevent bone loss?
Well, the researchers do use that term prevent, and that's their assessment of it. It might be a difficult distinction to make, which I've attempted to do early on when I described the remodeling process, where we're never really going to stop the continual breakdown and build up of bone. But what we want to do is slow the loss so that the buildup can continue at a greater rate. So it might be a term of how you want to define prevent. But I have checked the papers of the researchers, they do use that particular term. And if they feel comfortable using it, then that's their assessment of the results of their study.
Okay. Another question for you. Was there any information about foods or nutrients that would inhibit the beneficial effects of the prunes? Should we be recommending them with or without certain foods/nutrients to maximize benefits?
Again, we haven't studied that. I think that the research shows that a nutritious diet is beneficial. So I think, but that should be the bottom line, is the inclusion of prunes in a nutritious diet. I'm not so sure that just adding prunes to a diet that is low quality will have an effect. But as far as I know, there aren't any nutrients that would counter effect, or nutrients or foods that would counter effect including prunes in the diet. That is, if that's what the question is, I'm not aware of any research that prunes' effect is countered by combining them or eating them with different foods or nutrients.
Okay. I have one more question. Since gut health is a very current topic, are you doing any further studies on prunes and gut health?
Yes, we have done some initial work, again, in animals on the ability of prunes to lower the risk of colon cancer. And in animals, the research has found that the prune diet, and this is out of 40-gram serving. This is not a huge amount. This is what a Nutrition Facts portion size is. That a 40-gram equivalent serving in the diet of rats was able to lower the number of precancerous lesions in the colon. Now, the study did not continue to see whether or not these precancerous lesions actually advance to colon cancer. So now we are doing a follow-up study to take a look at that. But that study is currently underway. We don't have any results, but we do know that consumers do link prunes with digestive health, so this would be an important area to continue to research.
Okay, thank you, Mary Jo. So if your questions were not answered during the call, we will answer them and send an email with the answers to everyone. We're coming to a closing. I want to thank Mary Jo and Cara today for providing insights in bone health and all the research related to it. And I also want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think this was a very informative webinar. Please complete the short survey you will receive after this webinar. Thank you for attending, and have a good rest of the day.